Good morning and welcome to our ECO2 COP28 climate conference.
My name is Hannah.
And my name is Dublin.
And we are from Oases.
Whilst we wait for the other schools to join, please enjoy the footage that has been taken from the actual COP28 meeting in Dubai in the UAE.
To mute notification sounds, so that means that your computer doesn't ping anytime someone puts something in the chat. If you just click on more, the three little dots at the top of your screen, you can deselect notification sounds. And we know that you'll be posting all fantastic questions and pledges and thoughts throughout the conference. But don't worry if you don't see those straight away. We will be publishing them throughout the conference.
And we'd love to know which schools are here, so please put your school name and the country you're in into the chat.
So we are based in County Durham in the UK, but we know we've got schools from County Durham too, and all around the world. We've got lots of international schools that have taken part as well. So I'm really interested to see who's joining us.
So hello to Al Afram Language School in Egypt.
And hello to Kasai School in Hungary.
Hello to Nettlesworth School in County Durham.
And Jamnabai Narsi School in India.
And hello to Zanten Gymnasium in Germany.
We've got Colegio Divina Pastora in Spain. Hello.
Hello to St Mary's Catholic Primary School in Barnard Castle.
And Woodford County High School in the UK. Hello.
We're going to begin the conference now. If you lose the feed at any point, just hit the live button and it will return you to joining us at real time.
And the conference is being recorded, so don't worry if you miss any bits due to technical issues. You can always view them later when we put them on the UAC's YouTube.
Now we're going to go over to Rich Hurst from Durham County Council to open today's conference.
Thank you, Duvan, and hello everyone, and welcome to this year's ECO2 COP28 International Schools Conference. As Duvan said, my name is Rich Hurst. I'm an education advisor for sustainability education for Durham County Council. And this is the third year that we've run these online sessions for schools in County Durham and around the world. And this session this morning is designed for pupils between 11 and 14 years old. And if you're from an international school, that you have a good level of English understanding. But we're delighted that you're able to join us today. Now, these conferences are organised by passionate people from three organisations, from Durham County Council, from Oases, which is an outdoor and sustainability charity, and from Durham University. And we all think that it's really important that young people and their teachers from across the globe can learn from one another, that you can share your experiences of climate change, and also how it's affecting you where you live. But most importantly, that you can learn what needs to be done to limit the impacts of a changing planet and climate. And a little later on, you'll get the opportunity to ask questions of our expert panelists. And we've got specialists from Durham University and also the person leading the climate activity from Durham County Council. Hannah and Duvan will explain how you can pose your questions a little later. Now, this year, we're doing things slightly differently in that we're running our ECO2 COP event at the same time as the actual COP28, which is happening in Dubai in the United Arab Emirates. And you saw some of that footage earlier. It started on the 30th of November and it will run until the 12th of December. And this means that for the first time, we'll be speaking to Professor Chris Stokes from Durham University live out in Dubai. And he's there to present his research related to glaciers and to ice sheets and how they are being impacted by climate change. And alongside that, he's speaking to other delegates and policymakers to increase their understanding of climate issues. So we're delighted that Chris can join us this morning. We'll also be sharing some of your examples of the work that you've been doing in your schools as part of this project. And we'll be asking you a little later to pledge what you'll be doing to reduce your own carbon emissions. Again, Hannah and Duvan will explain that later on in the next hour. We can all do something to help. And as well as asking people to do their own small things, we're also asking you to see how you can talk to people in your schools, in your local communities, and maybe even talk to your national governments about what you'd like them to do. I'd like to thank everyone involved for all of their hard work in bringing these conference sessions together. and we hope that you enjoy the conference today. And now back to Hannah and Dovan, who will share the detailed agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Rich. So we've got schools joining us from around the world today, and we know that climate change is affecting different places in different ways.
And this is because all of the schools where you're based are based in different countries, so you'll be experiencing different climate change impacts. So some places, like where we are in England, are getting more intense and frequent rainfall, which is causing flooding sometimes. And Young Talent's #1 school in Poland shared that Western and Southern Poland have experienced lots of flooding due to high levels of rainfall and more frequent storms this year.
But some parts of the world are having hotter and drier weather conditions, and this is causing more wildfires. Zafi High School in Greece shared that their country is experiencing a lot more wildfires in recent years because of climate change.
Some places are experiencing drought, and drought is when you have very little or no rain for a period of time. And drought can last for days, months, or even years. And Hassan Ben Thabet School in Egypt showed that their region is experiencing heat waves and record-breaking temperatures more often. The drier and hotter weather is also increasing the number of sand and dust storms. The lack of moisture makes the soil looser and means that some of the plants which help hold the soil together are unable to survive.
In recent days, you might have seen that India has been affected by Cyclone Mishon. Now, tropical storms like this, which bring very high wind and lots of rain, are becoming more powerful and more common because of climate change.
In cooler climates, glaciers and ice sheets are melting and there is less snowfall. Kasai Uti Bilingual Primary School in Hungary shared that they have noticed less snowfall in the winter due to warmer temperatures.
So, what impacts of climate change are you experiencing in your country? Write them into the word cloud that is now appearing on your screen.
So it will pop up in the middle of your screen with a box for you to write your response. So that could be maybe you've noticed wildfires or more intense rainfall, more frequent storms. We're really interested to see how different schools are experiencing different impacts.
And so far I can see a school has said flooding because of the increased heavy rainfall. Flooding is becoming more of an issue.
I've certainly noticed that here as well. When I was travelling to work the other day, after some really heavy rainfall, we definitely had parts of my journey that were flooded.
Also, because of the melting ice and rising sea levels, coastal areas are experiencing more flooding.
We have got more heat waves as well in some of the countries. Early snow, that's an interesting one. That's important to remember that although globally temperatures are rising overall, some places are experiencing more frequent and intense snowfall and therefore colder temperatures.
Yeah, one school has said warmer temperatures, which I suppose is the big one from climate change. Globally, we are seeing a rise in temperature.
And heat waves as well, so certainly periods of time where it gets really, really hot. Cyclone as well, so that's a really intense type of storm, so maybe a school is noticing more of those in their area.
Well, thank you for sharing those climate impacts.
Okay, so COP28 is happening this year in the United Arab Emirates in Dubai, and COP stands for Conference of the Parties. So that means scientists and leaders from all around the world come together to discuss climate change and talk about how we can take action.
And this year's COP is really important because back in 2015, in Paris, COP agreed they committed to a 1.5 degree limit to the rise in global temperatures. Now, that was 7 years ago or 8 years ago. And at the moment, we're not on track to limit our temperature increase to 1.5 degrees. So COP28 is really important in making sure governments around the world agree on how we can cut greenhouse gas emissions and generate more renewable energy in order to do that.
So, as you've been learning in the lessons about renewable energy and fossil fuels, one of the big discussions this year is how we can phase down or phase out fossil fuels. So that's kind of keeping us with the global temperature rise below 1.5 degrees C. So at the moment, we are still using fossil fuels like coal, oil, and natural gas to generate heat, light, and power. But we know that burning fossil fuels releases greenhouse gases, which cause climate change. But sometimes they are currently cheaper than their renewable alternatives.
Now it's time for you to vote. Do you think we should stop using fossil fuels? As a class, answer the poll question that is now appearing on your screen.
So do you think we should stop using fossil fuels? Yes or no? We're really intrigued to see the results. And this will be like the discussions that they're having at COP28. So far I can see overwhelmingly, yes, schools do think that we need to stop using fossil fuels.
Yeah, and like you say, Hannah, this is one of the big discussions, the big talking point of this year's COP is when we're going to stop using fossil fuels to generate the energy that we all need. At the moment, we've had 10 responses, all of you saying, yes, we should stop burning fossil fuels.
We have got one response for no as well. So it does show, doesn't it, that people do have different opinions. And that's why things like COP28 are so important to discuss and move forward together.
Now, many scientists and world leaders don't believe that those at COP28 are doing enough to stop climate change. Some people are very worried about the choice of this year's president, Sultan Al-Jaber, because he is also the president of one of the world's largest fossil fuel companies.
So unsurprisingly, he believes that we can keep using fossil fuels for energy and wants everyone to slowly phase down rather than phase out fossil fuels. So phasing down means slowly reducing our fossil fuel use over a long period of time, whereas phasing out is about reducing our fossil fuel use more quickly, so we reach the point where we have no fossil fuels in our energy mix faster.
So what do you think? Should we stop using fossil fuels now or at some point in the future? Answer the question in the poll now appearing on your screen.
So do you think we should stop using them now or in 2030, 2050 or never? So if you'll cast your vote as a class and pop the results into the poll. So I can see we've got some responses for 2030 so far.
Yeah, so right now we've got 75% of schools saying 2030, which is only 7 years away.
Yeah, it's not
which might seem like a long time, but it goes very quickly.
We've got someone has said now as well, and we've got an answer for 2050 as well.
Yeah, interestingly, no responses for never. So everyone is saying we do need to stop using fossil fuels, but slightly different answers as to when and how fast.
And as I've said, this is exactly like what will be happening at COP28. All of the leaders from different countries have different ideas on this, and they're coming together to try and decide collectively together which one they're going to go for.
So thank you for those answers. We're now going to go over live to our own correspondent, Professor Chris Stokes, who is actually in Dubai at COP28. Hello, Chris.
Hello, everybody. It's nice to join you.
Hi, Chris. Please, could you explain to the children who you are and what you're doing at COP?
Yeah, so I'm a professor in the geography department at Durham University, and I teach the university students and I do research about glaciers all over the world in the mountains, but also in the Arctic and also in Antarctica as well. And because the climate's changing and getting warmer, the glaciers are melting and they're increasing sea level. So this is a real concern, especially for countries who have a coastline. So some of the schools from all these different countries might need to think, how long is their coastline and how much might sea level rise there? But also, even if you're from a country that doesn't have a coastline, if sea levels continue to rise, then people will have to move, and that might mean that people have to move to your country. So it will affect countries both with a coastline and also without. And I'm here to really tell the negotiators and the ministers that are here to make the decisions, trying to get across the urgency of this situation, because if we keep warming the planet, sea levels are just going to rise quicker and quicker. So it's a really urgent problem, and it's a chance for me as a scientist to get alongside the politicians and tell them about the urgency of the science.
Is this your first time at a COP conference, Chris, or have you been to any before?
It's actually my second COP. I also went to COP27 last year, which was in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt.
Ah, and we know from the intro video at the start that there are lots of different people that attend COP. So who have you seen or talked to at COP so far?
Yeah, well, it's an amazing event, really, because there's over 196 countries represented here at COP. There's over 100,000 people attending COP. And certainly for the first few days at the beginning of the week, it's what's called the high-level events. And that's when heads of state, prime ministers, presidents, King Charles III, Pope Francis were all here. And they were also here to say what their country is doing about climate change, but also to try and encourage all the other countries to take action on climate change. So for those first few days, as I was wandering around at COP28, you were seeing heads of state and presidents and prime ministers all over the place, really. They were everywhere, and it was very exciting. Of course, lots of them I didn't recognize, but some I recognized. And actually, some also came over to the part of the conference where we were talking about our science as well. So we managed to speak to some foreign ministers and the president of Switzerland as well, which was really exciting.
And how would you describe the atmosphere at COP? Is it hopeful?
Yeah, well, I mean, we're just past the halfway point in COP at the moment, and certainly very early on, there were some really good news stories, which really got everybody very hopeful. Some people might have seen that there were some new pledges around what's called the Loss and Damage Fund. This is where richer countries have offered to transfer money to poorer countries to help them deal with the effects of climate change. And that was really good. And that, I think the last time there was like over $700-800 million US had been committed to the Loss and Damage Fund. And of course, more will be committed over the coming years. There was also a new declaration signed about making food production more sustainable. So the food industry actually generates quite a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. And a number of countries all joined together to say we want to reduce the emissions from producing food in our country. And that's the first time that food had been a topic at one of the COPs. And then I guess the third big good news story was that over 100 countries have agreed to treble their renewable energy production by 2030. So that is the process of being less reliant on fossil fuels and being more reliant on renewable energy. So that was really good news. Now, you've already mentioned the importance of trying to limit warming to 1.5. And to do that, we need to really drastically cut fossil fuel emissions. We need to phase them out altogether, as you've mentioned. And that is going to be the biggest, most contentious issue. It's actually a rest day. It's called a rest day. About halfway through the conference, there's a rest day. So the negotiations have paused, and some of the ministers will come in next week, and they'll really try and reach an agreement on hopefully phasing out fossil fuels. But it won't be easy. So that's something to keep your eyes out in the news. And I guess people are cautiously hopeful, but you just never know in these things. So we'll just have to wait and see what unfolds over the next few days.
Well, thank you very much, Chris. That's really interesting. And I know you're going to stick around now for our expert panel questions. So we're going to ask your climate change impact questions to the panel, including Chris. Hello, panel. Okay, Chris, we will start with you then. Oh, there, we've got the panel. Hello. Would you be able to introduce yourselves quickly, panel? You're on mute at the moment, so you might want to unmute.
I'll go first. How's that? Can you hear us now?
We can, fantastic.
Great, that's great. Hi everyone, my name is Alan Patrickson. I work for Durham County Council. I'm the Director for Neighbourhoods and Climate Change. So for the council, I lead on all of our efforts to combat climate change in the county.
Hi everyone, my name is Kalila Mackenzie and I'm doing research into households' choices over renewable heating systems and particularly looking at geothermal district heating.
Hi everybody, my name is Stuart Jones and I'm a earth scientist, and I'm specifically interested in on how we actually abate the global warming by using storage of CO2 in the subsurface, and maybe looking at other energy storage mediums that we can actually do to help combat this transition we're going through.
Thank you for those, panel. I think I'll start with a climate question for Chris, which is from Al Afram School in Egypt. And they ask, when did the climate change problems begin? Or when did we first notice about climate change?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. I mean, people have known for a very, very long time, probably over a century ago, that there's a connection between greenhouse gases and the Earth's temperature, so that when you burn fossil fuels like coal, oil and gas, it releases carbon dioxide, which heats the planet. And people knew about that for a long time. I guess people really started to get worried about climate change in the 1970s. That's when we first started to see a real uptick in the global temperature observations. That's when warming started to look quite concerning, and we started to get warmer more quickly than we have for maybe thousands and thousands of years. And as that temperature increase has continued and continued, we've obviously got more and more concerned, and it's become clearer and clearer that human activity is causing the problem.
Thank you. And now I've got a question for our panel from Woodford County School in the UK. Is climate change affecting all countries or just some? So, for example, we know that there was wildfires in Greece in the summer. Was that to do with climate change?
Probably not one for me.
I would absolutely say yes. Every country is going to be affected, and every country is affected to a different degree. Of course, obviously, those that actually are affected by sea level change maybe don't have such high topography or closer to those changes are going to have a biggest impact. But climate change is exacerbating itself in all sorts of ways, such as potentially the wildfires. I know there was lots of misinformation that went out about many of those, that some of those were arson, and maybe some were, but there's also a general consensus that many of those were because of climate change. So everywhere is going to be affected by this, and everybody will be affected by it.
Just to add, I guess, often it's the most poorest or most developing countries that are most negatively impacted by environmental change, because they don't have any mitigation, or they don't have the resources to adapt mitigation or adaptation measures. And that's part of the reasoning behind the Loss and Damage Fund, is this recognition that for developing countries that have lower resources to adapt to climate change or mitigate against climate change, that there's support from more developed countries.
Thank you. So another climate or ice-based question for Professor Chris Stokes, and that's from Copeland Road School, and they ask, why are the icebergs melting so quickly?
So the icebergs are melting so quickly because the temperature is rising so quickly. You know, for ice to stay as it is, it has to be a minus temperature, and that's the case in large parts of the Arctic and the Antarctic. But because of global warming, those regions are warming up, and in the case of the Arctic, they're warming up actually more quickly than other parts of the Earth. So it's very simple process, you know, like your ice cubes that you put in your warm drinks. If you put an ice cube in a warm ocean, it will melt.
Great, thank you very much, Chris. That's really interesting. I've got a question again for the panel from Colegio Divina Pastora School in Spain. They ask, will it be possible to stop the increase in temperatures?
That's a really good question. I think we can slow it at present. We can maybe stabilize it, but if we carry on as we're going, it will still increase. So there's lots of ideas being put in place about how we can perhaps slow it. One of those is to stop using fossil fuels. That's the simplest solution, but that doesn't seem to be one that's been taken on board. It's not happening. We're still using our diesel and petrol powered cars. We're still heating our homes with gas. So, and that isn't going to stop just overnight. So we do need to do other aspects to actually try to slow this temperature rise down. And one of those perhaps is looking at how we extract or sequester CO2 from the Earth's atmosphere, and we take it and bury it into the subsurface. It is one process that we can do. Many projects are still in their infancy with this, and we need to ramp that up massively if we're going to actually make that into having any sort of difference. But no, we need to change our ways to be able to slow it and potentially reverse it in the future.
Thank you for that. We've got a question that's come from both Xanten Gymnasium School in Germany and also Al Afram Language School in Egypt. And they ask, what actions happened after COP27 that was held last year in Egypt?
I can answer that maybe. There are lots of actions, actually, lots of declarations that you will not hear about so much, where countries are getting together and agreeing on certain things. Maybe, you know, it might be to fund wind energy in another country, etc. But the big thing that happened at COP27 in what was called the Sharm el-Sheikh implementation plan was the setting up of the loss and damage fund. So it's interesting that although they set the fund up and they agreed in principle that we should transfer money from rich nations to poor nations to help them deal with climate change, actually implementing that plan happened at this COP just a few days ago, where countries finally started to say, this is how much money we're prepared to spend. So the big thing that happened in COP27 was the setting up of the fund, but actually at COP28, it's finally money is starting to flow and individual countries are making pledges as to what they will contribute to the fund.
Thank you, panel. We had some brilliant answers there to some terrific questions. Now, our panel aren't just experts on climate change. They also know a lot about energy and how we can transition from fossil fuels to renewable sources of energy.
If you have any questions on energy that you would like to ask our panel, now is the time to post them into the chat. For instance, our expert panel know a lot about what our energy mix might look like in the future if we stop using fossil fuels.
So you can post your questions by clicking on the chat button and typing in your question on energy for the expert panel. Please remember to add your school name and the country you're in so we know who is asking the questions.
So whilst your teacher posts your questions on energy into the chat, let's find out some more about potential energy solutions, because there are lots of them that are appearing and there will be lots that continue to appear as well.
Changing how we produce our energy is the big challenge facing governments and societies around the world. We need to stop burning fossil fuels and move towards cleaner energies like wind and solar that don't produce the harmful greenhouse gases.
The good news is there is lots of ways to generate and store clean energy. So in Dubai, where COP28 is currently taking place, there are over 100 solar palm trees. Solar palm trees are made up of lots of solar panels, like you can see in the picture here, as well as generating electricity from sunlight, which doesn't produce greenhouse gases. They provide Wi-Fi using the generated electricity, but they also provide shaded seating underneath, so they provide relief from really hot temperatures.
The London Underground transports millions of people around London each year. And as the trains speed up and brake, they produce a lot of heat. People getting on and getting off trains also produces a lot of heat. And we can use this heat energy to heat up water that can be pumped to homes and buildings back on the surface to provide them with hot water.
One of my favourite solutions is energy dance floors. They're a really fun way to generate electricity. And as dancers move around the dance floor, they dance or step or jump on special tiles. Their kinetic or movement energy as they jump and step is transformed into electrical energy. So some bands, such as Coldplay, have started to use them at their concerts. As the fans jump up and down to their music, the generated electricity is used to power lights, microphones, and speakers.
Sometimes, if the conditions are right, we can generate more electricity than we need at any particular time. So, for example, if it's a very windy day, all of the wind turbines are spinning, we're generating more electricity than we can use. We need to find ways that we can store that electricity for when we do need it.
And at other times, we need electricity, but we can't make it. So, for example, maybe there's no wind, or at night, solar panels can't make electricity because there is no sunlight. So we need to have a store of energy that we can use for times like this.
And one way we can potentially store energy, you can see on the picture on the slide. And that is an old mine shaft or an old mine tunnel. When we've got lots of electricity, we can use that electricity to pull a heavy weight up to the top of the mine shaft. And when we need to generate more electricity, we can drop that weight and convert that kinetic energy of the moving weight, the falling weight, into electricity, which we can send to homes where it's needed.
Another similar example is reservoirs, which are man-made lakes, and they can also be used to store energy. So the excess energy is used to pump water up to the top reservoir. And then when electricity or energy is needed, a door opens and the water flows downhill to the bottom reservoir. And as it flows downhill, like you can see in the center of the picture, the kinetic or movement energy of the water turns turbines, which makes them spin. The turbines are very clever because they transform kinetic energy into electrical energy. And the faster they spin, the more electricity they make.
Now, the great thing about all of these different ways of making energy that we've talked about is they don't produce the greenhouse gases that are causing the climate to change. Now it's time for you to vote. What energy solution do you think is most suitable for where you are? Vote in the poll. If you vote other, let us know in the chat what type of energy you think is most suitable. And remember to add your school and your country.
So the poll should be appearing on your screen now. So I want you to have a think about your local area. Which energy solution do you think is the most suitable? So for example, we're in the northeast of England. It's very windy here often. So I think wind turbines are the best solution for our local area. Whereas solar, sometimes we get a bit of sunlight, but not all the time. So it's maybe a slightly less reliable one for our local area.
I read an article in the week about how they're making electricity in Portugal, and they're using a lot of hydropower because they've got lots of mountains and rivers which they can use to generate electricity there.
Very interesting. And maybe if your school is located near a coastline as well, perhaps wave turbines can generate electricity for your local area. Geothermal as well, that's an interesting one. Obviously, there's countries like Iceland which have lots of geothermal energy available. But I know, for example, here in the northeast of England, we've got lots of old mine tunnels that they're looking into using for geothermal energy. So the old abandoned mine tunnels are filling up with water, and that water is heated by the underground temperatures, and we can use that to heat homes and buildings.
So thank you for all of your answers to that poll. We're now going to go back to our expert panel and we're going to ask them your questions about energy. So our first question is from our Akram school in Egypt and also from Zanten Gymnasium in Germany. And they ask the panel, which renewable energy source is the cheapest?
Wow.
Shall I kick off there?
Yeah.
I think we do a lot of work here in the northeast of England on alternative energies, and you've just been discussing some of those. And I think probably the best answer to the question of which is the cheapest very much depends on where you are and what resources you have available where you live. We have a real mix of alternative energies in the northeast of England. We use wind power, as we've already discussed. We do use a lot of solar power, even though the sunshine here isn't as hot and as warm as many other parts of the world and many other parts of the country. But we still get a lot of advantage from solar power, even in the northeast of England. And as we've discussed, we have a very particular source of power in the northeast because of our mining heritage of the mine water. Now, other parts of the world will have different sources that they can tap into, and even local areas like the northeast and the mining heritage. I'm sure local areas, specific areas of other country will have specific things that they can tap into, which will make the source of energy for where they are the cheapest for where they are. So I think it very much depends on where you are and what the conditions are that you're trying to generate energy in.
Thank you. We've got a question from Jamnabai Narsi School in India. They say they know that wind turbines and solar panels, so renewable forms of energy, are great for reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, but they do use natural resources like metals and things like that that can have a negative impact on the environment. How do we get the balance right?
That's a really good question, and it's one that many Western world countries have actually certainly been pushing with having electric cars and battery power. And of course, those batteries are made up of raw materials and they have to be extracted from the ground somewhere in the world, oftentimes not always environmentally friendly. And we need to think about these raw materials then have to be transported across the world by some means, either by ships or by train or by lorries and vehicles. And of course, they have a CO2 budget associated with them. So it's a real challenging one to deal with. And we need to deal with actually how we offset the carbon from some of this in some sort of way. And many countries are looking at actually perhaps having some sort of carbon tax or carbon budget, whereby we pay that to each other because we may be able to produce steel or some of the raw materials more effectively in one country to another, and we can offset that against each other. That's one way we've been looking at, but it is a really, really challenging problem that hopefully COP28 can hopefully address some of that. But it's one area that many of us at Durham are having to do research on to deal with.
Yeah, just one point to add to that. I know that, for example, there's some research being done here at Durham about how do we recycle the wind turbines, the metal from the wind turbines. So there's certainly thinking and research going on around that.
Thank you for those answers, panel. Xanten Gymnasium in Germany ask, can nuclear power substitute fossil fuels for a period of time whilst we switch to renewable energy?
It's one method, it's one. And I suppose many people are very concerned about nuclear power, not from actually it being able to generate sufficient power. Many countries rely upon nuclear, but it's actually what happens at the end of the life of a nuclear power station with the spent fuel. How do we store it? And countries like Finland are already developing means of actually storing this underground for thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of years in a safe environment. We're looking at something similar in the UK, potentially offshore, UK waters, deep underground, and actually storing it there again for geological periods. But it does have a negative impact as well, and people don't always want nuclear fuels actually on their doorstep or a nuclear power station. So it's one method. It could actually, help to that transition period from fossil fuels to more environmentally friendly renewables. But at the moment, there is also a cost we have to pay for nuclear power.
Thank you. I've got a question. It's kind of a combined one from two schools. So it's from Woodford County High School in the UK and Colegio Divina Pastora Córdoba in Spain. So they ask, how long will it take for renewable energy to be used all around the world, considering that every country's economy won't necessarily be able to pay for the change to green energy?
Well, that is a really good question, isn't it? And I wish we all had a crystal ball to be able to answer questions like that about the future of the world. I think when we have conferences like COP that we heard from earlier, and Chris was actually there, they're the mechanisms for making sure that the world acts together on this very difficult subject. And one of the issues that they have been talking in previous COPs, and Chris mentioned it from his report there, is how do those countries who are richer and more developed and perhaps have access to better technologies and better research help those more developing countries to come in the same direction so that they don't make the same mistakes that the developing countries did in the past. And we all have to think about doing things differently. So there is very much a global partnership required to think about what is our global energy needs and how do we share the kind of research that's done here at Durham University around the world to make sure that everyone has access to clean energy and safe energy, and that we don't keep repeating the mistakes that we've made in the past. And sometimes those mistakes were made with the best of intentions. We didn't have all the information as a species at the time. It's not that people were doing bad things. It's just that as the information gets better, we know that we can do things differently. And we have to put our faith in those at COP and those at national government level, and even those at local government level, like the ones I work with, to all pull in the same direction to get us to that right outcome. So I think that's how we need to think about those sort of things.
The other positive trend to keep in mind is that as these renewable technologies become more commonplace, we see their prices steadily go down. So we've definitely seen that trend with solar panels. As they become more available on the market, their prices have decreased over the years. So that's one positive trend. And then also just to keep in mind that there is recognition across countries that for some countries they have financial constraints, and then for other countries that maybe aren't facing those financial constraints, that there can be sharing of technology and financial support.
Thank you for those answers. I've got a question here from Jamnabai Narsai School in India, and they've learnt a bit about hydrogen power, and they want to know what the panel thinks. Could hydrogen be an energy source for the future?
Absolutely, and a lot of waste being placed into hydrogen. So currently hydrogen is typically used in the chemical industry for making various acids, making various chemicals, and is a really important commodity. But it's also combustible as well. And so you don't need much hydrogen in the atmosphere to make it combust or spontaneously combust. I think it's over 4% and it will actually ignite. So there's already technology out there for hydrogen fuel cell cars. I think Toyota make one that you can buy it in the UK. But the implication with this is that there isn't enough infrastructure to deliver hydrogen across the country at the moment. And so a lot of investment being putting into hydrogen. Currently, all gas-fired boilers that are being fitted legally have to be hydrogen ready. So they're looking at actually mixing hydrogen with methane gas to propel that into the gas-fired boilers. It's an interim step, but it brings hydrogen into the network. The other one is actually that hydrogen could be utilised for as a direct heating source and for hydrogen-powered boilers. It's also being looked at actually for, the issue is that wind power has this cyclicity within it. So when it's not windy, they don't generate any power. And so when it is windy, they often generate too much power, which you can't store in the network. And so what I want to do is actually undergo the process of hydrolysis, where you split water into oxygen and hydrogen, and then we store the hydrogen in perhaps a subsurface reservoir, and I'm meaning something underground, rock underground, several kilometers underneath a wind turbine or wind farm. And then when those days when it's actually not windy, we can use the energy from the hydrogen to power those turbines to generate electricity. So we actually balance our network out much more effectively. And so hydrogen is a real could be a potential game changer if we get it right. And we're still in the infancy of that, but we're moving along very quickly as well. From research here in Durham, but also elsewhere in the world as well.
I just think to add, I mean, I think Alan also talked about it in terms of which renewable energy source is the cheapest, but within countries and then even within a certain city or town, there will always be a range of different renewable sources. So how we think about it is there's not one source that's necessarily better than another. And so I think in terms of research, researchers are looking into all different sources, and policymakers are also considering having an energy mix with different renewable energies, and hydrogen potentially can be one of them.
Thank you. We've got a question which a few schools have put in, such as Xanten Gymnasium in Germany. We've talked a lot about generating electricity, but they've asked, is it possible to reduce the amount of energy that the world needs? So maybe if we're using less, we can use more renewable energy because we need less energy.
Okay, well, I'll kick off on this because I think the schools that have asked that question have absolutely hit the nail on the head there. It is really, really important for all of us to think about the energy that we use and only use the energy that we need to. And I think one of the most exciting parts of many parts of research has been coming up with products that can produce a similar outcome, but by using a lot less energy than we have done in the past. And one that comes to mind straight away for me as a local authority employee responsible for things like the road network across our region is streetlights. And over the last 10 years, we have been replacing all of the bulbs in all of our streetlights, with much more energy efficient streetlights. And we have thousands and thousands and thousands of streetlights. And if you've ever been up in an airplane and looked down on the country when you fly over it, you see how many streetlights we have. And if all of those streetlights everywhere across the world used less energy, that would be one huge step in addressing climate change by reducing the energy load. Now, that's just one small thing. If we did that on every aspect of manufacturing, every aspect of the things that we did in our daily lives, we would be hugely reducing the pressure on the planet. So absolutely, what a great question that is. It's so important to think about energy efficiency, using less energy, only using energy for things that are important, and trying to get the most out of the resources that we have.
Well, thank you very much, panel. That's been some really fantastic answers, and thank you so much, schools, as well, for asking your questions. Don't worry, schools, if your question hasn't been answered, we will be answering questions after the conference and placing the results on the website. So thank you very much, panel.
And as we've been hearing, there is a lot of hope in the fight against climate change. People around the world are taking action, including schools and children.
And seeing what you've been up to in the 3 lessons before the conference and the conference itself has been really inspirational to me. So I think we should all make one pledge of action that we are going to take against climate change. So last year at our COP27 event, I pledged to cycle more instead of taking the car, which I have managed to do on shorter journeys, but not longer ones. So this year, I pledged to take more public transport like trains and buses for my longer journeys.
And I pledge to eat more local food that uses less energy to be transported, and also to keep using my voice to put pressure on those in power, like politicians or companies, to make climate-friendly actions.
So we have been delighted to see all the work that you've been doing in your schools. Whilst we have a look through, post your pledges into the chat. Remember to pop your school name and your country as well, and we'll read some of those out after we've looked at your work.
And we're going to start off with Jamnabai Narsay School, who I know are here with us this morning. And they've sent us, well, they shared some terrific work that they did. So you can see a picture of some floating wind turbines that they created. And they also upcycled some old clothing into these beautiful bags with sustainable messages.
Oh, nice, I might do that. St Margaret's Primary School in the UK have created some beautiful artwork on their feelings about climate change and energy. And art is a great way to help tell people about climate change and help more people to understand it.
In Poland, Number 1 Young Talents Primary School shared some amazing work, including this giant map that they created showing the impact of climate change around the world. And they also did a lot of work about future lifestyles and careers that can be more green and more sustainable for the planet.
What we liked about that is no matter what career you go into, you can make sustainable choices in that career. And that's what we want everyone to be doing. Nehru World School in India learned all about solar panels, and you can see them pointing to solar panels on their roof in the picture on the left. And they also created these beautiful placards to help tell more people about climate change and to encourage people to take climate action.
I visited Copfield Primary School in the UK, and we created some solar and wind energy outside in their school grounds. And then they created these posters expressing the changes that they want to see to make a greener society.
And in Kasai Uti Primary School in Hungary, they shared some of their work, including these posters on the 5 R's. And they were looking about how we can reduce our consumption, which will help us look after the planet.
And finally, Al Ahram Language School in Egypt made some presentations to the different classes in the school about the impacts of climate change and different ways that they can save energy in the school.
So don't forget, you can view examples of other schools' work as well in the Google Share Drive, and you can ask your teacher if they've not already to upload your school's work to your school's folder. Just a reminder to keep posting your pledges. We'll read a couple out and then we'll go over to Richhurst to close the conference. So Ramshaw Primary School have said they are going to make sure they turn more lights off to reduce the amount of energy that they use. And they are going to reduce their consumption by recycling and buying less in the classroom.
I can see at Nettlesworth Primary, they pledge to be more energy conscious by turning lights off when they're not using them and turning off other electrical devices when not in use.
Great pledge. Woodford County High School are wasting less food. Speaking out about climate change, they want to walk and take the bus more and put money into restoration projects and turn off lights when they're not needed.
I've got a pledge here from St Mary's Catholic School, and they've got climate change champions in their school to inspire others to help the planet. Also, as a school, they have a clothes bank to donate old clothes.
Fantastic. From Jamnabai Narsi School, they pledge to grow plants without fertilizer to help support taking action against climate change.
So thank you for all of those pledges. Keep them coming. We'll have a bit more time at the end to hear a couple more. But now, to close today's conference, we'll go back to Richhurst.
Thank you, Dovan, and hello again, everyone. And I hope that you've enjoyed taking part in today's conference as much as I have, and also hope that you've all learned something that we can take away with us from today. I'd like to thank the organisations and experts that have taken the time to coordinate this year's conferences and also to write the education resources that have been used by so many schools. And those schools, I'd particularly like to thank you and your individual teachers that have taken the resources and shared examples of the pupil work through the Google Drive. Now, remember, if you'd like to watch any of this year's conferences again, you'll be able to watch them through the OASI's YouTube channel, but just give us a few days to be able to make that happen. But if you can't wait, there are recordings from the last 2 years of conferences available to stream from OASI's YouTube. Just search for that. As I said, I hope that you've enjoyed learning more about climate change and its impacts, and also what you can do to be able to reduce emissions, both yourself personally and also through your school and wider community. And we do hope that you'll be keen to take part in future ECO2 Smart Schools events. So thanks once again, and I'll now hand back to Hannah and Dovan to read out a few more of your pledges. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you, Rich. So I've got a pledge here from Colegio Divina Pastora in Córdoba in Spain, and they pledge to turn off lights when they don't need them. They're going to save water, recycle paper in the classroom, and they've also got an eco-friendly plan.
And to finish, from Al Ahram Language School in Egypt, they're going to look into installing solar panels on their roof.
So please look out for our post-COP event, which will be in February, and all participating schools will receive details about that, where we'll find out what's happened at COP28 and what those changes mean.
So thank you so much for coming to the ECO2 COP28 Climate Conference. We've been so inspired hearing what you've been up to. And as we said before, don't worry if your questions weren't answered. We will answer them and pop the answers onto our ECO2 Smart Schools website. So do check back in the future. We wish you the best of luck as well with your pledges of action. And if you do take action, let us know by emailing eco2smartschools@oasis.org.uk. And remember, if you post on social media, please hashtag ECO2COP28 so we can see what you've been up to. Thank you and
goodbye.
goodbye.